Good evening to you all. I welcome you again to our virtual teaching. Thank God we are done with the civilizations of Africa. Today we are moving on to another topic that also very essential in the history of Africa, and we are going to talk about the Trans-Saharan trade and the factors that led to the rise of the trade. So basically we are looking at the Trans-Saharan trade. We call it Trans-Saharan trade. We also refer to it as the Trans-Saharan caravan trade. So there are two things. Caravan, we understand caravan. We will also understand why we call it Trans-Saharan. But basically, let's take a look at our lesson objectives for today about the Trans-Saharan trade. So basically, we are going to look at the factors that led to the rise of the Trans-Saharan trade, or you can say the Trans-Saharan caravan trade. So we are going to know, or you should be able to know you should be able to discuss the factors that was responsible for the rise of the Trans-Saharan trade. What factors enabled the trade to rise, to become such an important trade? And mind you, this trade was so important trade in the history of Africa. But before we go into the factors responsible for the Trans-Saharan trade, let us look at what the trade was all about. All right. Now, the Trans-Saharan trade was an elaborate trading system which evolved between the Berbers and the people of Western Sudan. Goods like gold and copper were exchanged for commodities like cloth, beads, and metal product in their trading activity. Now, look at the name. The name is the Trans-Saharan. Trans, that's transportation. Saharan is the Saharan desert. So it means that Trans-Saharan trade means that the trade that occurred on the Saharan desert. That is what we term as Trans-Saharan trade, and that is why we even term the trade as Trans-Saharan trade. It was a trade that occurred on the Saharan desert. We also say Trans-Saharan caravan trade because the trade was conducted in a caravan. The dictionary meaning caravan, check for caravan, and caravan is what you see in the image there. You realize that camels come, in line with goods, caravan, because we use camels also. That is why we termed it as caravan trade. Now let's take a look at the origin. But the most two important people who engaged in this trade was the Western Sudanese people that we learned about, who were located just above West African forest and coastal states, and the Berbers. We already know the Berbers. The Berbers were the North Africans, as we have talked about them. The origin of the trade, let's take a look at where did this trade start from. Now, the Berber pastoralists usually procured goods from the Phoenician colony of Carthage, which were later exchanged for products of Western Sudan across the Sahara Desert. So the Berber pastoralists, these Berber pastoralists were rearing animals, and therefore they lived a nomadic life, all right? They moved from places to places. And so what happened was that, Carthage, right? You know where Carthage was, or of course, was found, as we discussed earlier. The Berber pastoralists who were living a nomadic life, will buy goods or products from those Carthaginians, okay, who had come from Phoenicia. They will buy them, and then they will bring those items to the Western Sudanese people. So they will come down, bring it to the Western Sudanese people, and then they will exchange it for them. So the Berbers were therefore the middlemen between the Phoenicians and the Africans across the desert. For example, the Garamantes, a Berber reading group, played a significant role in the trade. So if we ask you, which two people, or of course mention the people who engaged in the trade, we have the Phoenicians on one side, the Berbers being the middle, and the Africans also, or the West Africans also at one end. So you realize that we had three people who engaged in this trade: the Phoenicians, the Berbers, and the West African Sudanese people. So the Berbers will buy the items of the Phoenicians, Then they will bring it down and sell it or exchange it with the Western Sudanese items. Do you understand? And we are saying that the Berbers were the middlemen in the trade. Is it clear with a little of the and but before we go back, let's take a look at the image there. Now you see a caravan trade. This is a caravan. What you see there is caravan. We call it caravan. That is camels, you know, in that order with goods. So the trade occurred here because the Berbers were just nomad. So they lived, they go to places. So this is what you see there. This was the trade. It took place on the desert. That is the Sahara. That's why we call it Trans-Saharan trade. And that is the caravan you see there. And those items are some of the things that the Berbers are going to exchange it with the West African Sudanese people. Now quickly, let's take a look at some of the factors responsible for the rise of the Trans-Saharan trade. What were some of the factors that led to the rise of the trade, that led to the rise of the trade? One was the differences in commodities of exchange. There was a differences in commodity of exchange. So you realize that in Part A had commodities that were not available in Part B. I'm using this as an example. So if Part A people want something, they will bring what is in Part A, which is not in Part B, and then they will exchange it with those from Part B. So that is what we mean by the differences in commodities. So maybe for example, Part A had salt, Part B had fish, but Part A does not have fish. The Part A do not have fish. They don't have fish, but Part B has fish. So they will exchange the salt with fish. That is how one of them, of course, the reasons. So let's take a look at the two areas involved in the trade. In the first place, the different regions involved in the trade produce certain commodities that could be sold or were in high demand in one or the other of the zones. These commodities comprise the industrial goods of the Mediterranean world, Europe and North Africa, such as copper, salt, and dates. So you realize that in the Mediterranean world, that is the Asia area there, in the Mediterranean world, in Europe and in North Africa, these goods were available. All right, salt, gold, salt, copper, and dates. Okay, and these things were not found in the Sahara. Ivory, gold, and slaves were rather found in the Sahara, whereas cola and gold, cola nuts and gold were also found in the forest regions. Now take a look at in the Mediterranean, North Africa, in Europe, they had salt, copper, and dates. These three commodities were not found in the Sahara. They were not also found in the forest areas. The Sahara had gold and cola nuts, which were also not found in the Mediterranean. So all these people needed some sort of, the Europeans needed gold, which they didn't have, so they will have to bring their copper and salt and that to exchange gold. The Saharans also had slaves and gold and ivory, which maybe of course, Europeans also did not have, so they will exchange those things. That is the differences that we are talking about here. I hope I am making sense. Now, of particular importance in the trade were the item of salt, iron, gold, and slaves. These were the most important trade items in the trade. The question could be asked, which of these is the most important trade item in the trade? Look at all of them. Anyone that comes, choose one. Salt, iron, gold, and slaves. These were the most important item of trade. As salt and iron were in hot demand in the savanna and forest areas, so were gold and slaves were highly desired in Europe and the Mediterranean world. So in Europe, they needed gold, they needed slaves. They needed the gold to manufacture jewelry and other things. They needed the slaves to work on their plantations, but they didn't have them. Salt and iron were also not found in the forest area and the savanna. That is the West Africa here. So if you need gold, I need salt. West Africans need salt, but they have gold. Europeans also have gold, but they don't have salt, then that exchange comes about. Are you okay? Now, until the, of course, European discovery of the Americas, the Sudan was the main source of gold needed in the Muslim world and Europe. And by the 14th century AD, 2/3 of the world's production of gold was coming from Sudan to fill the raw materials needed in the European mints. So the Europeans needed those gold items to mint coins. Good. Let's take a look at the next factor responsible for the rise of the trade. There was also the introduction of camel in West Africa. And don't forget that the camels were the ones involved in the trade. They were the main transportation or means of transportation of the items. Another reason for the development of the Trans-Saharan trade was the introduction of camel into North Africa by the Romans during the 1st century. So the camels were introduced to North Africa by Romans. A camel was suitable for the Trans-Saharan trade as it could travel for several days without food or water and could carry a quite heavy load, while its flat feet could cope easily with the sands of the desert. So you realize that the slaves took place on the desert, and you needed an animal. You know, on the desert there is no water, much water is not there. So you needed an animal which will go far without food, and the camel can travel as long as 2 weeks without water, without food, and it will not faint. Nothing will happen to it. It will go. Now, it also had a flat feet that it could cope with the sand. You know, on the desert there were a lot of sand, but the desert, of course, camel did not mind. It could still move. The eyelashes of the camel could also prevent sand from entering the camel's eye during sandstorm. Have you seen a sandstorm on the Sahara before? It is deadly. Wind are carried like as if somebody has carried a wind sand and he has poured it on you. It is serious. So no animal can, of course, contain the dangers, the dangers in the Sahara. But the camel was able to do so because of its eyelashes. For these reasons, the camel is often referred to as the ship of the desert. You understand? Ship of the desert. Due to its importance, the Berbers of the Sahara adopted it from the Romans and used it in their southward migration. The Berbers settled in the oases in the desert and spread to as far as the southern fringes of the Sahara, where they could establish trading links with the Western Sudanese people between the 2nd and the 5th century. The spread and the use of the camel as far from the 7th century accelerated the pace of the development of the Trans-Saharan trade. I hope you get the whole issue. So without the camel, the trade could not have been a success because you needed an animal who could travel on the Sahara, and no animal, you couldn't use a horse, couldn't use any other animal. But because of the peculiar features that the camel had, the camel, of course, could cope with the dangers on the Sahara. It could walk without water, and of course there was no water on the Sahara. So if you go and bring a horse or you use a horse, the horse will just go and it will be tasty and it will faint eventually. So the feet also could cope with the sand. The eyelashes could prevent it in the course of sand storm and all of that. So you realize that the camel was then referred to as the ship of the desert. Without it, I am not sure that the trade could have been a success. No animal could have done that. And so that also helped the trade to rise. Good. Let's take a look at yet another factor responsible for the rise of the trade. The conquest of North Africa. Now, North Africa was also conquered. So the conquest of the whole of North Africa by the Arabs from the Middle East between 641 and 708 AD also provided yet another reason for the development of the Trans-Saharan trade. This conquest was accompanied by some developments. Don't forget Arab. We are all aware that Arab or the Arabians came to conquer North Africa. We are saying that conquest also enabled this trade to rise. How did it enable the trade to rise? The conquest came with it some development. One was that it increased the use of the camel in North Africa as well as the Sahara. Again, among the invaders were religious zealots and traders who were willing to spread the gospel. In addition, traders from the eastern part of the Muslim world, particularly from Iraq, moved to North Africa and settled in the terminal of the caravan routes from the Sudan. So we are saying that those who engaged mostly in the trade were the Muslims. And the Muslims came to West Africa as a result of the conquest of the North Africans. you get how that aided the rise. So without the Muslims, the trade couldn't have happened, because the trade were, of course, the majority of the people that engaged in the trade were the Muslims. So had the Romans still been there in North Africa, the Romans were not trading. They were not interested in such type of trade. So had it not been the context of North Africa, we are also saying that the trade wouldn't have rise to how it rose to become, to become. I hope you get the difference. Now, some of them later moved further south to settle in such trading centers as Gadames, Gout, Tadmaka, and Aduhost. Now, where they combined trading with missionary activities. So the Muslims, some of them were also religious zealots. They were interested in spreading the gospel, the Muslim faith. Okay. Now, these Arab immigrants and their Berber converts were responsible for the increase in the volume of the trade and the opening up of new routes, especially between the 8th and the 11th century. So you realize that when the Arabs conquered the North Africans, they also converted the Berbers into Islam. And therefore, that, those two people, the Berbers and the Islamic people, were the ones that made the trade to thrive. You understand? So without the context, we are saying that without the conquest and without the Arab traders coming in with the conquest, of course, the trade couldn't have risen to the level that it did. I hope I am making some serious points. Hope I am not confusing you. Good. Let's take a look at the last factor responsible for the rise of the Trans-Saharan trade. The last factor was the introduction of Islam into Sudan, and Islam was contributed to the development of the trade, especially in the 15th and the 16th century. Islamization of the Sudan allowed trade with the Muslim world. Muslim traders felt more secured in Islamic courts and towns of the Sudanese empires and kingdoms than before, and particularly as Muslims encouraged the spread of Arabic as the lingua franca. The introduction of Islamic mode of dressing encouraged the import trade in textiles, as well as the local textiles industry, in which the Hausa soon became great experts. The great increase in Islamic learning and education, which accompanied the introduction of Arabic, greatly encouraged the trade in paper, books, and manuscripts. The greatest contribution which Islam made to the growth of the Trans-Saharan trade, however, was the pilgrimage or the Hajj that was required of its members. Many of the Sudanese rulers of the period embarked on the pilgrimage to Mecca and drew the attention of the Muslim world to their states, and further attracting traders and scholars. So you realize that the Sudanese or the Western Sudanese were principal. They played a principal role in the trade. And what we are saying here is that had it not been the introduction of Islam to the Western Sudanese states, these Muslims who came from North Africa and the Arabian world wouldn't have felt secure in another country, not an Islamic country, to trade. They wouldn't have done that. That is what we are saying here. And more so, even with the spread of the Arabic language, don't forget that one of the effects that the Berbers had on the Western Sudanese states was the introduction of the Arabic language. So now the Western Sudanese could now speak the Arabic language. And so it became easier for the Muslim traders to come from the North Africa to trade with the Sudanese, because they saw the Sudanese also as being part of them. So without the introduction of Islam to Sudan, I am not sure, and probably Sudan was, doing her own thing as being a different person. Different thing altogether, having a different religion altogether. I am not sure that it would have attracted the Muslims to have come. And don't forget that at this time, the Sudanese had also, adopted the Islamic mode of dressing. And so those textiles were all imported from the Arabic countries for them to wear. And so we are saying that with the introduction of Islam into Sudan, that also enabled the trade to rise. Good. Now this is an objective question, and they can ask you some questions, either objectives or section B. So when you are learning, you make sure you learn into detail some of the articles of trade, some of the important articles of trade, and also some of the factors. The camel, for instance, what were some of the things or the characteristics of the camel that made it so suitable for the Trans-Saharan trade. You look at all of that into detail, and of course, shall bring our lesson to an end. We have a discussion, a question there for you to try your hands on. So, any reason, any rise for the Trans-Saharan trade? And also, I may want you to state any three features of the camel that made it suitable for the Trans-Saharan trade than other animals. Have a nice day. We shall meet again. Bye.